Hi everyone, Janie here. Welcome back to my garden and welcome to week 11 in my Master Gardener's Training recaps. I am going through my Master Gardener's Training program here in my county. It is a 16-week program and I am on week 11, and I am happy that I am on week 11 because my brain is full. So this week, how do I say this? It wasn't my favorite week, I guess. I'm just going to be honest with you guys. But this obviously is an important topic that we definitely need to know about as gardeners. And if you're going to go through the Master Gardener Training Program, I totally get why we need to know this topic. I just don't love talking about it. I don't love talking about bugs and insects and spiders. It's just not my favorite thing. It brings back memories. I am a trained physical therapist, and it brings back memories of being in classes and just looking for hours on end at pictures of wounds and gross stuff just so that we're able to identify it. And that was kind of how this class was last Friday. It was basically 4 hours of looking at pictures of bugs that might be in our garden. So again, there is a great purpose to it, and I feel so much more confident if I do get some type of bug problem, one, being able to identify it, and then two, being able to find out how to manage the problem appropriately, not inappropriately, which is a big issue for gardeners and for master gardeners to get that message across. You want to be able to handle pests and insects in your garden the right way. So the vast majority of this class was really focused on identifying the pests that you do have in your garden. And honestly, it makes sense why that is the most important part, because if you do not know what is causing the damage in your garden and you decide to use those broad spectrum insecticides, pesticides, you are actually going to be doing more harm than good. I think the most important message that I can get across as a Master Gardener trainee is to not use those broad spectrum pesticides, because what those do, yes, those will kill the bug that might be bothering your plant, but then they will also kill all the good bugs too. And I was reading in my textbook, which is a California-based textbook, of course, but I'm sure it's similar in other states as well. About 80% of the bugs that we do have in our garden are actually good guys that are keeping the bad guy population down. So if you use one of those broad spectrum sprays just to try and get one bad guy, you are going to be harming a bunch of good guys and messing up the balance that you do have in your garden and actually creating more problems down the road. So identifying what pest is actually bothering you and then handling it in a manner that's going to be the least toxic to everything else in your garden is really the way to go. It might take a little bit longer than spraying one of those broad spectrum insecticides, but it's going to be better for you and for your garden in the long run. Okay, so first off, when I talk about good bugs and I talk about bad bugs, just understand that I don't, there's gray in between. It's not all black and white. Some good bugs are good because they're predators and they prey on the not so good bugs, but they also have some negative aspects to them. For example, a praying mantid, or a praying mantis as we usually call it. A praying mantid is a predator, but it's a predator of everything. So it is a predator that will eat the good bugs but also eat the bad bugs, right? But we still think of a praying mantid as a good guy because it does eat the bad bugs. And then if you look at something else, you can look at like ants or something like that. Ants are good because they create air holes in your soil and aerate your soil, and it's good to have them in the garden, but it's also bad because they protect aphids, right? And I'll get into that a little bit later. But so whenever I say a good bug and a bad bug, it's not black or white. It's just like maybe mostly good or mostly bad, or at least in my area, we think of them as good bugs. So just remember that. I totally get that they're not all 100% good and 100% bad, but it's just for the manner of how I'm talking about them and, wanting to attract the good bugs into your garden and wanting to get the bad bugs to go away. Okay, so I think the first thing we need to talk about in identifying what insects you have in your garden that are causing the issue is you need to know what their feeding patterns are and what the feeding patterns look like. So if you look at a leaf and you notice some damage, you kind of need to be able to describe that damage. It's kind of the same thing as that symptom tree that I was talking about last week, where you need to properly explain what the damage is going on so that you can think about what type of insect might be eating that. And so insects have mouth parts, they have their mouths and they chew. Well, they either chew or they suck, right? And the two different types of mouth parts, chewing mouth parts or sucking mouth parts, are going to have different patterns on the leaves. And then each of those, the chewing or the sucking type of mouth parts, the bugs will do it in different manners, so it's going to look differently. I'm going to reference my notes. So for a chewing mouthpart pest, you could have a defoliator that feeds on leaves and just eats the whole leaf. You could have a borer that actually chews into the structure and you can kind of see tunnels. You can have leaf miners, which feed within the leaf, or you can have a skeletonizer, which feed on a few layers of the leaf. Same thing with sucking mouthparts. You could have mottling, which is where they suck out the chlorophyll or, the stuff that's inside the cell wall. So it looks like a loss of chlorophyll. And that might look like stippling on the leaf. You can also have deformation, which would be tissue damage on the leaf. So you kind of have to look at these different type of symptoms to be able to say, oh, that is chewing. Some type of bug has chewed and skeletonized my leaf. So it's a type of skeletonizing mouthpart pest. So then you can further try and identify exactly what is going on so that you can treat the problem. Now, I want to be careful in saying insects because, of course, not all the bugs in our garden that are bothering us are insects. We do have arachnids like spiders, but then also mites like spider mites. Those are actually spiders. Then we have arthropods, which are like crustaceans, like crabs. Those are the pill bugs, the roly-poly bugs. Those are actually crustaceans. And then, of course, snails and slugs, which I hate the most. Well, do I hate those the most or earwigs the most? I don't know, but those are mollusks. So, you want to be careful about saying insects, or I want to be careful about saying insects because they're not all insects, so we can't treat them all exactly the same. And then on that note, how you can't treat all pests in the garden as insects or as one type of bug. You also can't treat all pests in the garden at the same stage of their life, right? So what you need to think about when you're thinking about bugs in your garden is you need to think about their growth patterns. And just stick with me here. I know when I was learning this, I was like, I don't care about the growth patterns, but it actually does make sense. There are actually 3 ways that bugs will grow, but I'm just going to talk about 2 of them. One of them is a gradual metamorphosis is what it's called. And that's kind of like a good example of this is a praying mantis. When a praying mantis comes out of the egg sac, it looks like a baby praying mantis, just a tiny little praying mantis. And then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's just a bigger size. The adult is a bigger size of that praying mantis. It doesn't actually change at all, right? It's going to have the same type of feeding mouth parts the baby is and the adult is. Well, then another way to think about that, or another type of growing pattern, is a complete metamorphosis, which is where the growing stages of the bug look nothing like the adult stages, right? And so there are actually 4 main stages. There's the egg, there's the larvae, there's the pupa, and then there's the adult. And this is important to us as gardeners because if it is like in the pupa stage or the larval stage that is causing the problem, you need to know that. You need to know that the adult doesn't cause any problems, but that adult is going to lay eggs, which is going to have larvae, and those larvae are going to possibly do some damage or do some good in the case of ladybugs, right? If you think about a ladybug, they lay their eggs, the ladybug larvae come out. Those ladybug larvae are fantastic. They actually eat more aphids than the adult ladybug does. But you need to know that if you see these scary looking ladybug larvae, those are good guys that actually eat more, even though it doesn't look like a regular ladybug like we know. Another one of my least favorite insects in the garden is the cabbage moth or budworms, right? And so the cabbage moth, the little white moth, and it's not really a moth, it's a butterfly, because butterflies technically fly during the day and moths fly during the night, and cabbage moths fly during the day. Does that make sense? But they have budworms, and that is their larval stage or their caterpillar stage. And that is where they do the most damage to my supertunias, right? And so you kind of have to think about that, is that this little butterfly is not doing absolutely any damage to my plants, but it as a baby is doing intense damage to my plants. So can I hit it as a baby caterpillar stage, take care of it in that stage, but then leave the other pollinator insects alone? And the answer is yes, you can, but you have to understand the growth patterns and the growing stages of these insects. So I know I have talked about this website 1,000,001 times, but it actually is the most useful website you can have, because the point, if you guys are going to go through a Master Gardener's class, you need to understand that they're going to give you a ton of information, but they're not going to expect you to know everything. You don't need to know every single insect, arachnid, mollusk, arthropod in the garden and memorize it all. What you need to know is you need to know how to identify it by using the resources that you do have. And so this IPM website, and I will link it down below, but this website, we use this website for diseases in the garden, weeds in the garden, and then also pests or insects in the garden. And you find it, basically, you can find it based on what the bug looks like, but if you don't actually see the bug and you just see the damage that the bug has left, you can identify the bug based on the damage using this website. So this is, of course, a California website, but I'm sure that there's overlap, especially if you live on the West Coast. And then I'm 99% sure there has to be other websites in other states similar to this California IPM website, because IPM, or integrated pest management, is so incredibly important to us as gardeners. And what IPM is it's a method of treating the pest in your garden, whether it's a disease or a weed or a bug, and it's doing it with the least toxic method possible first, right? So, if you have a bug if you have spider mites in your garden, spider mites are attracted to hot, dry environment. So it can be something as simple as spraying your plants with a hose to increase the humidity. That is actually a way to get rid of the bugs, but you're just spraying water. So you're not spraying any insecticides, any pesticides, anything bad. You're just spraying water to get those spider mites not to spawn, come basically, and you're trying to keep the populations down as much as possible. So checking the IPM website, I have it bookmarked on my computer. I feel like if you're a gardener, you probably should know this website and know how to use it. It's very, very easy, but it's going to be something that's so helpful to us as gardeners. All right, so I obviously can't go over all of the bugs that we learned about in class. It was a 4-hour class, and probably 3 hours of that was just looking at different bugs, beneficial bugs and not beneficial bugs, right? But what I did is, as I was listening, I wrote down 5 of the good guys and 5 of the bad guys that I wanted to talk to you guys about. Some of them that we know, and some of them that we might not know or might not be as familiar with, which I just thought it would be interesting to share this with you guys. So I'm going to start with the beneficials first. The one that we all know and love are lady beetles or ladybugs. And the important thing to know about ladybugs is the larval stage, like I was talking about, right? The larval stage and the adult stage, those are both predacious, which means they will eat the bad bugs, they will eat the aphids, which is really important. I think that understanding what a larval stage of ladybug looks like, also what a pupa stage of a ladybug looks like, which the pupa stage actually doesn't eat the aphids, but of course the pupa stage turns into an adult, and then an adult lays eggs, and that's what you want. So you just want to make sure that you are not looking at these stages of a ladybug and thinking that it's a bad thing. I can say this because when I saw ladybug larvae for the first time in my garden, I had to ask my neighbor what they were and how to get rid of them. And he's the one who told me, no, those are ladybug larvae. Those are good, good thing to have them there. So luckily he was there and he could answer that question for me. But I know a lot of people mistakenly see the scary ladybug larvae because they're creepy looking and think that it's a bad bug, and it's really not. The other thing that I do have to say is, so think about what ladybug larvae are going to eat, or ladybugs are going to eat, right? They're going to eat aphids, and aphids will show damage like deformation on your plants. So if you see damage, and then you see a ladybug larvae, because they're bigger than the aphids, you might immediately think that the ladybug larvae is causing that damage, when it's not. The ladybug larvae is actually eating the aphids that are causing that damage. So it's important to be able to understand and identify some of these things that are really going to help us out in the garden. One really interesting thing I do want to talk about ladybugs, lady beetles. There is a type of lady beetle called a mealybug destroyer lady beetle. Yes. So mealybugs are a bad bug in our garden. I mostly get them indoors on my houseplants, but a lot of places will get them outdoors. I know when my family and I go on vacation to Hawaii, I often see mealybugs on plants in Hawaii. There are actually lady beetles where the larval stage doesn't look like, this larval stage. It will actually look like this larval stage, which looks very similar to a mealybug, right? And so basically what it's doing is it's camouflaging itself so that it can come and it can eat the mealybugs. And the reason why it has to camouflage itself is because ants will actually protect mealybugs. They will actually protect them from other larvae that will try and eat the mealybugs, because the ants want to eat the honeydew that comes from the mealybugs. So I will get to ants in a little bit, but I just thought that that was important to show that there is a lady beetle where the larvae looks like a mealybug. So yeah, talk about getting complicated. I just found that so incredibly interesting. Okay, next beneficial insect that I'm sure I've heard of as well is a praying mantid, or otherwise known as a praying mantis. And these guys, you can recognize them by their specialized forelegs that look kind of funny, and then their articulating head that will turn. I don't know if you guys have these in your garden, but I do, and it is very disconcerting when you see one and it turns its head to look at you and you're like, ah, but you gotta leave it because they're a good guy, right? So like I was saying before earlier in this video, these guys are generalist predators, which means they eat a ton of different things. They eat the bad bugs, but they also eat some of the good bugs. They do overwinter as eggs, right? And so that means the praying mantid will hatch in the spring, and then will grow up into a bigger praying mantid, and then the female will actually lay eggs, and the eggs need to last all winter long until the next spring. So the egg sac is called an ootheca, and this is what it looks like. And I did a reel on Instagram about this, and I think it's really important because, again, I made the mistake and I didn't know what this was, and I thought it was a bad thing, but no, it's actually a really good thing if you find something like this in your garden. This is a praying mantis egg sac. You want to keep it in your garden. It's great. It's wonderful. Be happy that it's there. Okay, now on to a couple beneficial bugs that you might not have heard of. You might have, but you might not have heard of. The first one is a Predatious ground beetle. This is a black beetle, and it lives in the ground, and so you might see it as you're digging it up. It looks very similar to other beetles, like pest beetles, the bad beetles, but the way to know that this is a good guy, because they eat the bad guys, is they actually have a pinched waist. The pest beetles are just straight, the waist is straight. The good guys have a pinched waist. And so this is what the larvae looks like. So this is the larvae, this is the good guy, and then this is the bad guy. So if you see these guys in your garden, good for you. It means you have nice, healthy soil, and you probably won't see it because they're very, very nocturnal and they only come out at night, but it's just something to note. I've definitely seen these guys as I was digging around. So it's a good thing, and you want to leave them. You don't want to hurt them and throw them away or smash them with your trowel. Okay, then we have parasitic wasps. Have you guys heard of these? They're crazy. They're absolutely crazy. They are very, very tiny. And what they do is they actually lay eggs. They lay their eggs in the larvae of other insects. They lay eggs in aphids, wood-boring beetles, caterpillars. They can even deposit their eggs in earthworm eggs, which of course isn't great because we like earthworms, but they basically can deposit their eggs in the larvae or the egg sacs of other bugs. And then those eggs grow inside those other bugs and then eventually kill them, right? And so they're actually a very, very important beneficial bug. And thinking about the growth patterns, it's the egg or the larvae that are the predators here. It's not the adult. The adult does nothing. It's the eggs that really help. And they actually really, really help with the mite population, the aphid population, and they're really, really helpful to us. So these you might not see without like a microscope or something like that, but just know that predatory wasps are a really, really good thing to have in your garden. Okay, and then the last beneficial that I want to talk about are syrphid flies or hover flies. I don't know if you guys have seen these in your garden. I see them quite often because of the way that they fly. I mean, they literally hover, and sometimes I feel like they're staring at me, right? And they kind of look like tiny little bees, but you'll know the difference because their abdomen is actually flatter than a regular bee, and they're actually flies, and they're actually really, really good because they do feed on pollen. They are really good pollinators, but their larvae are actually really good predators, and they will eat the pests in your garden as well. So syrphid flies are fantastic. You can attract them to your garden with lots and lots of different kind of flowers. And if you do see them, it's a great thing, and welcome them to your garden. Okay, now to talk about some not so good guys. I'm not going to say bad guys, but not so good guys. So these guys, I hate them. They are a thorn in my side in my garden, and I can pretty much guarantee I'm going to see them every year. And it's just a matter of just understanding how to manage them appropriately and not go crazy and run to the store and buy a pesticide and just spray everything, right? So the first one that usually comes out earliest in the season are aphids. The thing that you have to know about aphids is that it doesn't matter what variety of aphids are. There's a bunch of different colors of aphids. There's black, there's brown, there's orange, there's green. It doesn't matter. An aphid, for our purposes, an aphid is basically an aphid, and we're all going to treat them basically the same. The really bad thing about aphids is they have an incredible reproductive capacity, which they actually have babies already in their bodies when they're born, or eggs in their bodies as they're born, and so they just reproduce so incredibly quickly. So they can cause stunting, deformation, honeydew, and sooty mold. And the thing to note about them, I was talking about this a little bit before with mealybugs, but they are mutualistic with ants, and I will talk about ants next. But basically, because they have honeydew, because they excrete honeydew, which is their poop, right? The ants like to eat that honeydew, and so ants will actually protect the aphids from predators. And so if you have ants in your garden, which is the next not so good guy that I'm going to talk about, the ants are basically the bodyguards for the aphids and the bodyguards for the mealybugs. And so they have a mutualistic relationship. And so if you're going to try and control aphids, you also want to try and control the ants. And of course, ants are incredibly difficult to control. They were talking in my Master Gardeners class, and they were saying that they've actually done DNA testing on ants, and they found that there is an ant colony that goes from the very northern part of California all the way down to the very southern part of California. It stretches across the whole state north to south, which is absolutely crazy. So you're not going to get rid of ants exactly, right? But you can limit the population, and you can limit the damage the ants can cause. If you have, for example, you get a lot of aphids in your fruit trees or aphids in your trees, you can use something called tanglefoot, which is a very sticky tape that you can wrap around the base of the tree, and that will limit how many ants are going to get up to the top of the tree where the aphids are, and are actually going to protect those aphids from the good predators. So if you limit the ants that are protecting the aphids and the good targeted predators might be able to get control of all the aphids, and that will solve your problem by just putting a sticky tape around. With ants, I do use ant bait because we have really bad ants here. I have horrible ants here in my garden, and it wasn't until this Master Gardener's class that I realized how mutualistic they are with some of the bad bugs that I do have in my garden. So it's just an important note to understand their mutualistic relationship, and if you limit one of them, you might limit the other one. I did not realize having so many ants in my garden would be such a problem. Again, I want to say there are good things that ants do. Ants aerate the soil and all that kind of stuff. But I think for me, the bad outweighs the good. And then the next not so good guy that I want to talk about are earwigs, which I absolutely hate. I cannot stand earwigs. You can recognize that you have earwigs either by seeing them, right? They're like pincher bugs is another way to describe them. They do have chewing mouth parts, and you'll know that you have earwig damage because you have ragged holes in the leaves of your plant. I get these all the time. I get these on my salvia, really, really bad. And so earwigs are a definite issue for me. They are omnivores, so they actually do eat other bad bugs as well. So it's another one like the ants where you can't say it's all a bad bug, but the damage that the earwigs do to my plants outweighs whatever good they're doing in my garden. So I don't like them. They are nocturnal, and there are ways to deal with them. I personally use Sluggo to deal with earwigs. I think it works really well, and I feel comfortable using Sluggo. If you don't feel comfortable using Sluggo, you can do something like a wet newspaper and roll it up, because earwigs are attracted to dark, wet places. So if you roll it up and put it in your garden, they'll be attracted to inside the newspaper, and in the morning you can just pick the newspaper up and throw it away. And that's a really easy way to control them. To me, that seems like too much work. Plus I don't get newspaper, so Sluggo it is for me. And then the next one are slugs and snails, which we all hate. We all can't stand. They are good because they are decomposers. They do break down leaves, leaf mulch, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, they do have a benefit. And if we didn't have slugs and snails, we would be up to here in leaves in our garden, right? But again, their badness outweighs the goodness for me. And you can also recognize that you have slugs and snails because, again, irregular holes in your garden. It's pretty hard to identify earwigs versus slugs and snails. That's why I like using Sluggo, because it gets all of them. I do want to say they didn't recommend Sluggo in my Master Gardener's class, obviously, because that would be a couple steps later in that IPM, integrated pest management flow sheet. But I'm just being honest, I do like using Sluggo. So slugs and snails lay eggs and hibernate in the soil, and they prefer cool and moist conditions. So the best thing that you can do for slugs and snails is to clean up your garden. Make sure you don't have any leaf piles or mulch piles, or you don't leave droppings all over your garden. That's probably the best way to do it, which is kind of difficult, especially if you mulch with leaf litter, all that kind of stuff. So it's just kind of a difficult thing. There are ways to do slugs and snail traps with cans of beer, like tuna cans of beer, and they are attracted to that and they'll fall into that. So you guys can look that up. But yeah, another one of my least favorite things. And then finally, I wanted to talk about spider mites. They have sucking mouth parts, so they're going to show signs of stippling and discoloration on a leaf. They favor dry, hot conditions, and they actually dispense on the wind. That means the wind will bring a spider mite from one plant to another plant. So I live in the California Valley, so we have hot, dry wind. So exactly what spider mites like. But again, being able to identify what's going on is really important, because like I was saying, if they love dry, hot conditions, maybe all you have to do is take your hose out and spray down your plants every day or every other day to increase the humidity, and that will actually decrease the spider mites laying their eggs and taking roost or making itself a home in your garden if it's not hot and dry. So yeah, so there are predatory mites that will eat spider mites, and you can wait for them to come to your garden once you do have spider mites. But again, that might be too late at that point, so there might be other things that you want to do. And if it's bad enough, you might want to get to the point where you're spraying some type of miticide or insecticide, but you do have to know what's going on in your garden to be able to make that decision, right? So that's kind of the point that I'm making, is that being able to identify what type of bug in your garden is probably the most important thing. It's probably the hardest thing because there are thousands and millions of different kind of bugs it could be, especially if you're watching this, like say in Florida, you're gonna have a whole bunch of different bugs than we have here in California. So you're gonna have to do your own research to kind of look it up. But it is important, and it's something that us as gardeners do need to know. And if you are thinking about taking the Master Gardeners class, this is going to be something that you're going to have to go over and are going to be tested on. So you do have to pay attention. My point is that I spent 4 hours looking at bugs on Friday. So that's okay. That is all right. I didn't have any nightmares, so that was good. So anyways, let me know if you guys have any questions about insects or pests in the garden. Again, not my favorite topic, but it's important. So I hope you all enjoyed this, and I hope you all have a chance to get in your garden today.